this is actual refuse.
What's up, everybody? My name's Greg, and this is the burlybuilds YouTube channel. So this video was requested by a bunch of people at the racetrack. It's just a walkthrough of how we built this thing, and really I'm just going to go in the rough order of how we built it, from the engine to the cage to the electrical, things like that. But I'm going to go at kind of a high level for this video. I am going to make a more detailed video for some of the more key aspects. One of the biggest ones being is how we got it to pass tech. That was a big question we had out there, especially because half the car is gone. So yeah, enjoy. So one of the first challenges we took on with building the car was getting the engine to fit. This is a LQ4 6-liter engine out of a 2002 Silverado, and it's paired up with the 4L80 two-wheel drive transmission that came out of that same truck. So as you can see, there's a bunch hacked apart at the top of the firewall where the cowl is. It's really hard to tell how much we had to hack out of here. I'll put some pictures into the video so you guys can see that. But it's probably roughly 4 to 6 inches farther back than the stock Mustang engine would have been placed. This thing was really hard to fit between the shock towers as well. We had a ton of fitment issues with the exhaust and with the oil pan. And so we wanted to try to make this as cheap as possible. So we were trying to keep the stock truck oil pan and the factory exhaust manifold. We didn't end up keeping the factory exhaust manifold. We got one that was pretty similar. You can kind of see down in there. It's a manifold style cast unit. But one of our biggest challenges was the steering box. It's really hard to see down in there, but we'll get some pictures to upload as well. And so what we ended up doing was just moving it farther and farther back till the oil pan went behind the steering. And I'll get some video of the bottom here in just a second. Here's a shot from the inside so you can see exactly how much firewall we had to rebuild. Pretty much all of it had to come out. Another shot from the driver's side here, give you a view up and inside of how much we had to rebuild. One of the other issues we had was radiator fitment, and so we ended up buying a Gen 1 F-body conversion radiator for an LS, so the inlet and outlets were in the right spot, but the measurements worked out to fit between and on the core support as needed. We have two other coolers here at the front end. One is the transmission cooler, which is a B&M unit we found on Facebook Marketplace for really cheap, and it's nice because it has a self-contained thermal switch on it, which is behind this plate right here. The reason we put that plate there is so that we wouldn't get a false reading of the temperature at speed, and the fan will turn on correctly. The other cooler we have here, some of you might recognize this. It's a steering cooler out of a Silverado. It's actually out of the same truck the engine came out of, and we're using that for oil cooling. One of the other efforts we did to make this as cheap of a build as possible is to retain the factory computer that came out of the truck and the factory electrical center that came out of the truck. And so the computer was probably the more difficult part of that, having to remove the VATS, which is the vehicle anti-theft system, so that you don't actually have to have the factory key, and then also just getting it programmed to remove all of the emissions stuff, get it to turn the radiator fan on, things like that. We got it all figured out on our end, and then reusing the electrical center actually wasn't too bad. There's a bunch of bulletins out there of what pins to remove, what to keep, what to add on to use different functions like the fuel pump. I'll do a more detailed video of that whole electrical piece and how we made that work. The exhaust was fairly straightforward. We just got a bunch of pipes for really cheap off of Facebook Marketplace. Spent very little money just getting some stuff that was straight, that had a couple O2 bungs, and yeah, just welded it up. Nothing too special there. One other really key mod that we did fairly early on in the project was converting over to a 5-lug and disc brake. This was originally a 4-lug car and a 4-lug 6-cylinder car, and which made it even less valuable. But we converted it over, did ball joints, tie rod ends, things like that to make it just more safe to go down the track. Something we did early on in the process was a quick release steering wheel with the rod. One of the big reasons we did that was because we needed to make sure that the steering rod cleared all the exhaust down in there. And it's probably really hard to see, but you can see where that comes in. Fortunately, we were nowhere near the exhaust, so that made life easier, but hey, I'm glad we did it early on. So one of the next things we did after getting the engine all in place was to get the roll cage built. In order to do that, we first needed to fix all of the floors. So there was a bunch of rusted out floor work, and you can see there's all new plates in there. One of the other big things was adding floor plates like that one that sister up to the rocker sill. And that's actually in the NHR rulebook. I'll go through all of that in a separate video, but a fully welded 6x6 plate, I believe, I'll get into more details later, but was required. And so we got the floor in, we got all those plates in, and then we started building the roll cage. And so you can see there's quite a bit of tubing. There's a lot of requirements we had to have in order to make it past tech. I believe this one's rated to 8.5 seconds if I understand it correctly. But obviously well beyond the capabilities of this vehicle. I think it only runs a 13.7. But because all of this structure was gone, from what we could tell, we needed to build the roll cage to convertible specs. So that's what we did. I'll go into more detail, obviously, in a separate video, but it was fun to build this one. One of the next key mods after finishing up the roll cage was to swap in this Ford 8.8 rear end out of an Explorer. It does have a limited slip, and the cool thing was it actually has factory overrides because this was out of a V8 Explorer, and I'll show you exactly what we did with those in a second. Right here you can see where the traction bars come through the floor from the axle. This allows us to transfer the force from the axle rotation into the chassis. We just use the same 6-inch floor plates that we use for the roll cage, and then put on some tabs you can see right here. And what that does is prevent axle wrap and allows us to get much better traction. The conversion to the 8.8 Explorer rear end also gave us 5 lugs and rear disc brakes. So that was a great advantage. So a huge upgrade from, I believe it was a 7-inch or a 7.25-inch ring gear that would have come factory in this Mustang, and to give us that 8.8-inch rear ring gear. Once we had the engine figured out and in place and the roll cage in place, the next step was fuel. And we picked this fuel cell up off of Facebook Marketplace, super cheap. Put in a really cheap fuel filter, fuel pump combo that we got off of Amazon. I believe it's an Evil Energy. You can see right there. Just LS swap general fuel pump kit. After we got fuel in place, one of the next pieces that we did was the battery and general electrical. So there's a couple things here. One was obviously getting the battery to the back to get more weight back here, because obviously with most of the car gone there wasn't much left. And then one of the other things we had to put in was a cutoff switch for the battery and for obviously for all the power to the vehicle. One thing we've noticed right away was that actually didn't kill the car when you turned it off, because the alternator was still wired up front to the block, and so to the junction block up there. So we ended up having to relocate the wiring for the alternator back directly to the battery. We ran it through that circuit breaker. One of the next big things to tackle was safety in the driver compartment. We had this seat out of one of my friends, I think it was out of his Samurai way back in the day, so shout out to Mark for that. And then just got some new harnesses so they would meet tech. We had a window net, obviously, because there's no windows in the car. And then also put in padding on the roll cage to ensure, obviously, if I get bumped around, I'm not running into the roll cage itself. So next on the list, I'm going to walk through just a bunch of the things that we needed to do to pass tech. Just random, I guess they're not random, obviously. If you read the rule book, they're all definitely there and obvious and required. So one was a rear firewall. Obviously this was missing it. We just cut some sheet metal up, and then also used some old just school signs that were legally acquired. And obviously to pay homage to the event, we put a big DTD back here with the gazillion Evil Energy stickers that we got throughout the project. If you've done an AN project with Evil Energy stuff, you'll know what we're talking about. Two other requirements on the inside of the car for tech. One is obvious, a fire extinguisher, and we made it so it was within my grasp and I was able to release it with one hand in the event that I need to. The other is the shifter. So we originally just put some cheap Amazon shifter where you can see those 3 bolts are on this little cover plate here. We used to have a different shifter there, and it didn't have a spring-loaded neutral like safety pull handle, and so that's a requirement for the for any drag racing. And so found this B&M on Marketplace for really cheap. It was designed for, I believe, a 3rd gen Firebird, but hey, you know what, it had the right amount of speeds and worked for our application. The windshield is another requirement for tech, and this one was another donor from one of my father-in-law's cars, where this one had a scratch from the wiper blades on it, and so he put a new windshield in one of his other cars, and we got this one. The car I don't think actually required a roof, but I had this sign laying around and I like shade, so bada bing bada boom. One other requirement is a drive shaft safety loop. It's kind of hard to get a video, so here's a picture. Up here in the cockpit we have the switch panel, which includes the ignition switch, the start switch, lights, so headlight, tail light, and then a override switch for the line lock in case we don't want power to the switch on the steering wheel. Additionally, up here we have an indicator light on the right there for when the line lock is active. We have the oil pressure gauge, which we did a mechanical one because the LS computers don't take an oil pressure signal, at least not on this year. And then we have a cheap OBD2 reader that is simply just a display. It's just taking the output data from the computer, so things like RPM, temperature, etc. So on the steering wheel we also mounted the line lock switch with a coil style wire. That way we could set the line lock really easily. One thing you guys might have noticed is that the car didn't have the drag slicks on it that we were racing with. Obviously don't want to have the car sitting on the drag slicks and causing flat spots, but these are actually not even mine. They're my boy Billy, so shout out to him. They're his slot mags from his Firebird, along with the drag slicks are his also. As we built the car, we tried to pay homage to a bunch of just roadkill cars, to the Duct Tape Drag events. One example of that is this luggage rack. So the 2024 Duct Tape Drags, basically as they were judging, they said any vehicle that has a luggage rack would be allowed in. So we installed that to pay homage to it, and we just put a really crappy trunk lid from another Mustang on here, held down with hood pins. This rear valance was off of one of my father-in-law's cars. He needed to replace the valance on the car anyway and use this as an excuse to buy a new one for that car and get that one off of his other car and onto this one. So that way we had some swag points. For the tail lights, we actually put a little Harbor Freight trailer light in there and then wired it up to just a quick connect. Little tour of the hood here. Freiburger was standing on the opposite side of the car than we anticipated, but we put the internal combustion for life sticker on there to try to catch some attention. We also have the General Mayhem tribute hood scoop on here. Relatively non-functional, maybe keeping the engine a little cooler, but we did it also to clear that massive truck intake manifold that's still on the car. We also put some stickers on here for 00 O'Reilly using the factory Ford emblems that were on there. Ironically enough, the F and the D were already missing. We had a little bit of a fitment issue here with the radiator cap. Nothing the plasma torch couldn't help us fix. And yeah, that's the hood. Up here on the front end, you'll notice this bumper doesn't quite fit the car right. The bumper was off of a different year Mustang. I don't know my Mustangs that well, but it you know what, it bolted up and is functional. For the headlights, I had these laying around from an old work project, and we just bolted them right in place. Much cheaper than figuring out the factory stuff. Thanks again for stopping by. If you liked what you saw, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more. If you want to see this car get roasted by David Freiburger and Derek Bieri, click the link that you can see right now. Thanks and have a great day.